my friend, and welcome to the study, where tonight we're going to visit a princess in a palace. A beautiful princess from the kingdom of Prussia, who married a prince from another country, another kingdom. We're going to delve into the life of Princess Frederica Charlotte of Prussia, Duchess of York. Friend to, among others, Prinny, or Prince George, future King George IV, and Beaubremont. We're going to do some reading from books, from a journal, and learn about the life of a beautiful princess. So get comfortable, get ready for paper sounds, some history, and sweet dreams. Princess Frederica Charlotte Ulrike Katharine, Princess Royal of Prussia and Duchess of York and Albany, was born on the 7th of May, 1767, in Schwedt, Prussia. She was the eldest daughter of Frederick William II of Prussia, later King of Prussia, and Elisabeth Christine of Brunswick-Lüneburg. Elisabeth Christine of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel, daughter of Karl I, Duke of Brunswick and Lüneburg, was the sister of King Friedrich II of Prussia. Friedrich had arranged this marriage of his niece Elisabeth Christine and his nephew Friedrich Wilhelm, the future Kaiser, hoping they would produce heirs for the Prussian throne. The marriage, however, was unsuccessful. Friedrich Wilhelm neglected his wife and also had affairs with dancers and actresses. But when Frederica was born, a girl instead of a boy, the marriage further deteriorated. Elisabeth Christina began to have affairs of her own with army officers and musicians. In January 1769, Elisabeth discovered she was pregnant with the child of her lover, a musician named Pietro, and the couple planned their escape to Italy. The stuff of legend puts that at a masked ball, Friedrich Wilhelm was informed by an anonymous masked attendant of the ball that his wife was pregnant. He grew angry and asked his uncle for a divorce. King Friedrich II, of course, refused initially, but then eventually he relented, and the musician Pietro was beheaded. Elizabeth was placed under house arrest as a prisoner of the state, the ducal castle of Stettin. She and Frederica never saw each other again, and she died on the 18th of February 1840 at the age of 93, after having spent 71 years under house arrest. At that time that she was arrested, Frederica was less than 2 years old. So she was sent with her half-siblings to be cared for by her paternal grandmother, Louise Amalie of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel. When Frederick the Great died in 1786, Frederica's father succeeded to the Prussian throne as King Friedrich Wilhelm II. She was only 19 years old. It had been 5 years before that Prince Frederick, the Duke of York, second son of Mad King George III of the United Kingdom, visited Prussia. His older brother, the future George IV, was the Prince Regent after their father's death. He met Frederica at that time, and in 1791 he returned to the Prussian court in the hopes that he could have support from the Prussian army in a possible war against Austria. He fell in love with Frederica, proposed, and she accepted. Their marriage would occur on the 29th of September 1791 at Charlottenburg Palace, satisfying the requirements of the Prussian court. They made their way to Britain and married again at Buckingham Palace on the 23rd of November to satisfy the British court. The Duke was head over heels in love with Frederica and wrote to his friend General Grenville, "I have no doubt of being perfectly happy. The princess is the best girl that ever existed, and the more I see of her, the more I like her." Ladies' Monthly Magazine described the Duchess as a rather below the common height in stature, her figure proportionately delicate and slight, her countenance pleasing, her complexion exceedingly fair, her hair light, eyelashes extremely long, and her eyes blue and remarkably brilliant. Frederick, who was often in debt because of his gambling, now increased his parliamentary allowance after his marriage. The marriage was not happy for long. Frederick was unfaithful as his womanizing ways continued, and they never had any children. In 1794 they separated. Frederica lived out her life at Oatlands in Weybridge, Surrey. However, they remained on good terms, and they never caused any scandal. Frederica, quiet and receding, was not much for the London society life, and rarely got involved in it, never got involved in politics or any other royal family issues. She spent her time doing charity work in Weybridge, helping the needy, and working on musical projects. Frederick, it is said, would visit her weekly, but they made no attempt at reconciliation. It is said that Frederica spoke English with a German accent, but Much of her correspondence was in French. In fact, she wrote to Beau Brummel, often, if not exclusively in French, signing her letters Freddie, Frederic, or just F. The Yorks bought Oatlands Park near Weybridge on their marriage in 1791 with the impressive allowances of £18,000 from the civil list, £7,000 from Ireland, and a full £45,000 a year from the Duke's holdings as Prince Bishop of Osnabrück. Prince Fred visited Princess Fred at weekends, but he kept up a mistress, Mrs. Clark, in town. Freddie preferred the tranquillity offered at Oatlands to the intensity of Hanoverian society in which her husband, Fred, flourished. For London and the Hanoverians were full of fondness for gambling, military show and training, protocol, ceremony, and of course an insatiable taste for expensive, outrageous elements in the social set of the day. In contrast to this, Oatlands provided a relatively sedate seclusion, for which the gentle and sweet-natured Freddie was very grateful. She immersed herself in her handicrafts, pets and music, and the interests of the local population. She was noted for having a good sense of humour, and her likeness for society leaned more towards the artistic, it is said. She was friends with authors, poets, and artists, and her fondness for animals was legendary. She was said by many who frequented Oatlands and of the bon ton of London society to have been very close with Mr. Beau Brummel. Freddie shared with Beau a love of animals, of sketching, and of house-party frolics. Brummel writes that he had several times stayed at Oatlands with the Duke and Duchess of York, both of them most amiable and agreeable persons. Another guest writes, "We were generally a company of about 15, and our being invited to remain there another day seems dependent on the ability of our royal host and hostess to raise sufficient money for our entertainment. Despite their impressive income, the Yorks were constantly in debt. We used to have all sorts of ridiculous fun. The Duchess kept beside a number of dogs, for which there was a regular burial place, a collection of monkeys. Lord Alvanley and Monk Lewis were great favourites at Oatland, along with Beau Brummel and Poodle Bing. Oatlands, by virtue of having a legitimate regal chatelaine, who was also considered a charming hostess, was unique among the royal palaces, and it had a special place in the memories of those who were invited there as a result. Oatlands might be deemed a court, wrote Raikes, in which the affability on one side and the respectful attention on the other were equally remarkable. It was the only existing retreat of correct manners and high breeding. The stamp of character upon the place was Princess Frederica's, and Oatlands became representative of an attractive hybrid of aristocratic respectability and distinct eccentricity. Freddie kept many animals, mainly dogs, but also monkeys, parrots, a llama, and a kangaroo. And it was said to have been distraught when Oatlands had a major fire, not by the damage it caused so much as the upset to her animals. The elaborate mausoleums are the only legacy at Oatlands of this characterful and popular hostess. Oatlands started its life in the Tudor era, when Henry VIII built it, the stone being taken from one of the abbeys that he dissolved. It then had a long life and was also a hospital during the Great War. It's now a hotel and has been rebuilt several times since the Yorks had it at the beginning of the 19th century, and very little remains of what it would have looked like then. Freddie, not greatly suited to the Hanoverian British court at the beginning of the 19th century, was not exactly an intellectual, but more keenly interested in her immediate domestic sphere and friends, and, unfashionably, the welfare of animals, more so than with the court or high society. She was quoted as saying, "They are so dependent on us for kindness and protection. I think we ought to love them, if only to wake the better part of our nature. They are sincere, they are honest." A Newfoundland dog walked obediently in her funeral cortege some years later, from Oatlands to Weybridge Church. In this somewhat suburban dog-loving mien, she might have been seen as the precursor to modern British royal ladies. "The Duchess of York is a pattern for others to emulate," wrote Bon Ton magazine, but could find little more exhilarating to say about her than that she pays her tradesmen's bills regularly and writes her own drafts on her banker. In British high society of the times, this was high praise indeed. Though not directly active in politics, it is said that she exerted a certain influence on her husband in matters such as the Sugar Act for the sugar coming from the West Indies and the abolitionist movement against slavery. She was also briefly noted for setting the style for tiny shoes with her small stature and tiny feet. She was not unattached to the capital, and made dutiful appearances at court and at the opera, but chose most of the time to stay in the southwest with her pets, and receive weekly gossip and updates on the metropolis from the crowd around Brummel, whom she asked down for weekends. At another Oatlands house party, Thomas Raikes writes again that there were some 20 or 30 different sorts of dog in the house, and many a morning have I, to my annoyance, been awakened from an incipient slumber after a long sitting at whist by the noisy pack rushing along the gallery next to my bedroom, at the call of old Daw the footman, to their morning meal. Within the collections at Elmbridge Museum, there's a collar of a dog once belonging to Freddie. On it the inscription reads, "Satan, at her feet we depose our wiles. All must be good when Frederica smiles. The very saints rejoice and chant aloud in heaven. By Hompesh Satan's self is to an angel given." This dog had been presented as a gift to the Duchess by Baron Hompesch, a notorious duellist. The Duchess had received many animals as gifts, and also one from Beau Brummel, which both of them named Fidelité. Freddie seems to have had a very close relationship with Brummel, a relationship that remained so until she died. Freddie's charity was well known in her village, and George Fisher writes, "The children of her neighbourhood were considered by her nearly as her own, being clothed and educated in her immediate supervision. Every Sunday she summoned them into her presence and administered cake and wine to the joyful and innocent troop with her own hands. As they grew up, apprentice premiums were allowed them, and even small marriage portions were awarded to the young women. And the old and sick were neither forgotten." Frederica suffered from tuberculosis and died on 6th of August, 1820, at Oatlands Park. She was only 53. Frederick was present, and shortly before she died, she asked him to allow her to be buried in Weybridge instead of St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. On August 13th, 1820, she was buried in the chapel of St. Nicholas at Weybridge, also known as Weybridge Old Church, in a simple vault as requested. The inhabitants of Weybridge were deeply upset at the passing of their beloved Freddie, whose compassion had touched the poor and the ordinary as much as her humour had pleased her close friends and her pets. For a bit of contemporary colour, we'll look at the journal of the reigns of King George IV and King William IV by Charles C.F. Greville. A couple of entries are interesting to get us into the bon ton of London society, and they mention Oatlands. August 4th, 1818. I went to Oatlands on Saturday. There was a very large party. Mr. and Mrs. Burrell, Lord Alvanley, Berkeley Craven, Cook, Arthur Upton, Armstrong, Foley, Lord Lauderdale, Lake, Page, Lord Yarmouth. We played at whist till 4 in the morning. On Sunday we amused ourselves with eating fruit in the garden, and shooting at a mark with pistols, and playing with the monkeys. I bathed in the cold bath in the grotto, which is as clear as crystal and as cold as ice. Oatlands is the worst managed establishment in England. There are a great many servants, and nobody waits on you. A vast number of horses, none to ride or drive. A week later, August 15th, 1818. The parties at Oatlands take place every Saturday, and the guests go away on Monday morning. These parties begin as soon as the Duchess leaves London, and last till the October meetings. During the Egham races there's a large party that remains there from the Saturday before the races till the Monday se'nnight. This is called the Duchess's party, and she invites the guests. The Duke is only there himself from Saturday to Monday. There are almost always the same people, sometimes more, sometimes less. We dine at 8 and sit at table till 11. In about a quarter of an hour after we leave the dining room, the Duke sits down to play at whist, and never stirs from the table as long as anybody will play with him. On Monday morning he always sets off to London at 9 o'clock. He sleeps equally well in a bed or in a carriage. The Duchess seldom goes to bed, or if she does, only for an hour or two. She sleeps dressed upon a couch, sometimes in one room, sometimes in another. She frequently walks out very late at night, or rather early in the morning, and she always sleeps with open windows. She dresses and breakfasts at 3 o'clock, afterwards walks out with all her dogs, and seldom appears before dinner time. At night, when she cannot sleep, she has women to read to her. The Duchess of York is clever and well informed. She likes society and dislikes all form and ceremony, but in the midst of the most familiar intercourse she always preserves a certain dignity of manner. Those who are in the habit of going to Oatlands are perfectly at their ease with her, and talk with as much freedom as they would to any other woman, but always with great respect. Her mind is not perhaps the most delicate. She shows no dislike to coarseness of sentiment or language, and I have seen her very much amused with jokes, stories, and allusions which would shock a very nice person. But her own conversation is never polluted with anything the least indelicate or unbecoming. She is very sensible to little attentions, and is annoyed if anybody appears to keep aloof from her or to shun conversing with her. Her dogs are her greatest interest and amusement, and she has at least 40 of various kinds. She is delighted when anybody gives her a dog, or a monkey, or a parrot, of all of which she has a vast number. It is impossible to offend her or annoy her more than by ill-using any of her dogs, and if she were to see anybody beat or kick any one of them, she would never forgive it. She has always lived on good terms with the royal family, but is intimate with none of them, and goes as little as possible to court. The regent dislikes her, and she him. With the Princess Charlotte she was latterly very intimate, spent a great deal of time at Claremont, and felt her death very severely. The Duchess has no taste for splendor or magnificence, and likes to live the life of a private individual as much as possible. He goes on to note how amicable the relationship between Fred and Freddie was. The Duke and the Duchess live upon the best terms. Their manner to one another is cordial, and while full of mutual respect and attention, they follow separately their own occupations and amusements, without interfering with one another. Their friends are common to both, and those who are most attached to the Duke are equally so to the Duchess. And so we have the portrait of a kind lady, unlucky in marriage, but nonetheless having lived a generous life of kindness and care of those in need. A delicate and petite beauty, well loved in society. And so, my friend, is the story of Princess Frederica of Prussia, Duchess of York, friend to animals and a great many grateful people in her circle. She made her small world better for her existence, her generosity, and her kindness of spirit. Be good to yourself, my friend. Be kind to others. And as always, be extraordinary.